In our last video, we discussed several causes of social categorization broadly and of stereotypes specifically. Now let's take a look at a few of their effects, both positive and negative. So, what does social categorization do for us? Let's start by thinking through why we've adapted our social thinking to be categorical in the first place. Well, the main reason is a very simple one. Conceptualizing others in terms of social categories economizes our thought. It takes much less energy to use your knowledge of categories to make assumptions about someone or something, rather than having to figure out everything from scratch for each individual. For example, if I were to tell you that I just got a new Pimwit, you might be confused. What's a Pimwit? You have no information. However, if I told you that a Pimwit was a rare breed of dog, you'd immediately have all sorts of educated guesses about my Pimwit. For example, you might assume that my Pimwit has 4 legs, fur, and a long snout. So by giving you information about the category to which my Pimwit belongs, I've reduced the effort required to understand it. To make an analogy between human thought and a computer, you can think of social categorization as similar to using folders or using the Stacks feature on Apple computers. Instead of having a ton of individual files messing up your desktop, for example, you can instead organize similar files into folders, or similar people into social groups or categories. Social categorization works in much the same way as it helps organize the way we think. So there are certainly benefits to social categorization. We've adapted to think in this way because we as humans are cognitive misers. That is, we typically seek to use as little effort as possible to complete a given cognitive task. Why think extra hard about something or someone if you don't really need to? I will note, however, that there are individual differences in what we in psychology call need for cognition, which refers to how much different people enjoy engaging in effortful thinking. People who like to solve puzzles, think through complex problems, or generally get their brain working are high in this dimension, in need for cognition, and so they might find social categorization less appealing or necessary. Others, in contrast, are low in need for cognition and they generally don't enjoy thinking more than they must. For these people, social categorization might be very appealing. So it might be no surprise then that people who score low on need for cognition are more likely to stereotype. And speaking of stereotyping, let's discuss some of the negative effects that social categorization has on the way we think. As we've seen before, social categories guide social judgments, and the process is very simple. If an individual belongs to a social category, like being black, being white, being a woman, being a man, or whatever, we automatically have expectations about that individual based on the category to which we think they belong, just like with the Pimwit. And based on our expectations, we form judgments about that individual, which, as we've seen in the definition for prejudice, these judgments are often premature. Prior to evaluating the evidence, we already have all of these judgments in place based on our expectations, which are typically based on our stereotypes. Here's a simple classic study that illustrated this process very well. Participants in this study watched a video of a girl playing near her home, and they were asked to judge her academic performance. Now, half of the participants in the study were assigned to a condition where they viewed the girl playing in a very nice living space in what looks like a very well-to-do suburban area. The other half of the participants in the study, however, were assigned to a condition where the girl is playing in what looks like a relatively poorer environment in a bad neighborhood. Now, the results showed that participants in that second condition, in the bad neighborhood condition, judged the girl's academic performance significantly worse. They assumed she would perform much worse. And again, the only thing that was different between the two conditions was basically the environment, the category to which we thought she belonged. Was she wealthy, or did she come from a impoverished background, right? And this guided our thinking. At the broadest level, social categorization has 3 important consequences that are particularly relevant for a psychological study of diversity. First, we maximize differences between groups. That is, we believe groups are much more different than they actually are. At the same time, however, we minimize differences within groups. That is, we believe that individuals within a group are more similar than they actually are. There's actually more diversity in a given group than you might think. I mentioned in our last video the outgroup homogeneity effect, specifically regarding racial differences in fusiform face area activation, or FFA activation. So the outgroup homogeneity effect, just to put an official definition to it, refers to the tendency to think of outgroup members as highly similar to one another, but in-group members as unique. As an example, you might have heard all Asians look alike, right? This is a physical manifestation of the outgroup homogeneity effect. Less FFA activation means you're not processing differences between the faces, the facial expressions, the facial features of people of a different race, and so they all look similar to you. Think about the implications this could have for example, picking out black men in a police lineup. If you're white, for example, the outgroup homogeneity effect would suggest that you're more likely to pick out an incorrect black man because you see them as all highly similar, and this could lead to more false convictions. And in fact, we do see this, and it's a major problem. As a final consequence, we explain their behavior differently than our behavior. That is, we explain outgroup behavior in a qualitatively different way than we explain in-group behavior. This is called the ultimate attribution error, which is the process or the phenomenon in which we assume that outgroup behavior is caused by inner causes, something about them, whereas in-group behavior is caused by circumstances. The reason, for example, you're seeing a black man, if you're white, arrested on news or something is something about that person. Maybe it's their race, maybe it's their gender, maybe it's whatever. It's something about them that caused them to behave in this way, and now they're being arrested for it. But if that same situation you were seeing, and it was a white man, right, being arrested, you might think, oh, more situational factors, more circumstantial things. What caused him to behave this way? Not something about him, but something about the environment, something about the situation. This is the ultimate attribution error. It might sound a lot like something you may have learned before, the fundamental attribution error, also known as the correspondence bias, and it's very similar. The ultimate attribution error is sort of a specific case of the fundamental attribution error. The fundamental attribution error refers to assuming that other people's behavior is caused by inner causes or dispositional factors and underestimating the power of situational forces on behavior. The ultimate attribution error then can be thought of as the fundamental attribution error applied specifically to in-groups, out-groups, and stereotyping.